All right, I will say good morning. We have a beautiful, beautiful daf ahead of us today. I want to begin by thanking our sponsors, to thank our Talmud Torah sponsors for the month of Elul, Ed and Faith Wolf and family for dedicating the shir in memory of beloved father, grandfather, and great-grandfather Cyrus Wolf Shalom Ben Tzvi Hirsch Zichron Livracha, a week of learning dedicated by Jack Bennett in memory of Lieutenant Colonel Yossi Korakin, who died in a Hezbollah ambush leading his unit in Lebanon. Barry and Rena Dubin in honor of their daughter Sophie, and all of the suburban graduates going to Eretz Yisrael to continue their learning. Yehuda and Bracha Buchwalter in memory of Florette Buchwalter. Our Daf Yomi sponsors, Jeff and Shari Venick and Stephen Holly Venick in memory of their father Herman Venick, Chano Yisrael, Ben Ruben Zichron Livracha. We hope that in the merit of our Talmud Torah, all of the neshamas should have an aliyah, their families in Nechama, and all of our young men and women going to learn in Eretz Yisrael should Hashem have a beautiful and successful year. And I will say with that, let us begin. Really an incredible Gemara today. So we begin the new parak. Today's daf is Yud Ches. We are picking up 18. We are picking up on Yud Zayin Amud Beis 17b at the Mishnah. So the Mishnah introduces a fascinating concept. Osin pasin lebiros. You can go ahead and make pasin for biros. So I will say biros literally means wells. So Rashi, look at the first Rashi. Rashi says over here, Shebershus harabim. We're talking about wells situated in the public domain. Now we'll say now wells pose a fascinating issue for Legabe Shabbos. Why? A well itself has the dimensions, often has the dimensions of a Rishus Hayachid. Namely, it has an opening of 4 tfachim and a depth of 10 tfachim, which makes the well itself a Rishus Hayachid. The problem is the individual drawing the water is standing in Rishus Harabim, public domain. So how do you draw water from a well on Shabbos? I will say, so I want to point something out, very interesting over here. Even though the well itself belongs to the public, right? Meaning the well we're talking about over here is public property. But again, even though something is public property, if it has the dimensions of a private domain of a Rishus Hayachid, it becomes a Rishus Hayachid. So says Rashi, so osin pasin biros, shebershus rabim biros, atzma rishus hayachidein, shamukin asarve, and yachal lamalo saying the osin pasin elu lahachim lem hekev shu apasin halalu osin es sevivos habar rishus hayachid v'imale v'yotzi v'yaniach sham v'tikanos behemto v'yeshakena. So we'll say, so listen to this. So you go ahead. The Mishnah is introducing this idea, and we're going to see why this was done. But the Mishnah is going to introduce the idea that in order to draw water on Shabbos, you could essentially make inferior mechitzas. So also we just finished off the sugyas of mechitzas, right, geruin, so inferior types of enclosures. So the paradigmatic example of an inferior enclosure is going to be used to enclose wells. What do you need in order to enclose a well on Shabbos? So essentially what I'm doing is I want to make the area around the well an enclosed area, Rishus Hayachid. Therefore, I have the ability to go ahead and draw the water. So how do I do that? Arba diyumadin nir kishmona. You make 4 diyumadin. You make 4 of us that we're going to see. These are 4 double panels. Essentially, panels arranged at right angles at all 4 corners around the well. We're going to see the word diyumadin as a contraction of 2 words. Dio, 2 amudin. Two panels. So nir kishmona, they look like 8, because I will say because they're 2 panels. If you could imagine 2 panels arranged at right angles at each corner around the well. That encloses the well, so they have the appearance of quote-unquote 8 walls. Div Rabbi Yehuda, Rabbi Meir Omer, Shmona nir kishnei masar. So it says, you're going to see Rabbi Meir holds that no, you need the 4 corner panels. So again, the 4 that are like 8. So the 4 panels at the corners that are at right angles. But according to Rabbi Yehuda, according to Rabbi Meir, you need an additional panel on each side as well. So if you can imagine, in the middle of each of the double panels, you require an additional single panel for a total of, we'll call it 8 panels that look like 12. So the Gemara says, Shenir Kishnei Masar, Arba Diyumadin, Varba Pshutin, Golfin Asar Tfachim, V'rochban Shisha, Va'ovyon Kol Shehu. We'll say the halacha is Govan Asar Tfachim, the height of these panels. The height of these panels is going to be 10 Tfachim, and their width are 6 Tfachim, Va'ovyon Kol Shehu, but their thickness, any amount. So we'll say, so again, I need a height of 10 Tfachim, I need a width of 4 Tfachim, and a thickness of any amount. Ubeinehen, now we'll say how much space could be between each of these panels. Now we'll say this is really going as we're going to see according to Rabbi Huda. So we'll say according to Rabbi Huda, all I really need in order to enclose a well area are what we call 4 diyumadin. So at each corner, I need one of these double panels arranged at a right angle. So we'll say essentially it's an L-shaped panel. It's an L-shaped panel, so it encloses the corner. I need four of these types of L-shaped double panels arranged at each corner. Fine, the height of the panel has to be 10 tfachim, the width has to be 4 tfachim, and the thickness any amount. The shaila now is how much space can you have in between each of these panels? So the Gemara says, "Ubeinehen kimalishte revakos shalosh shalosh bakar divrei Meir." Meir says there could be enough space to have 2 teams of cattle with 3 cattle each. So you could have enough space in between each of these L-shaped panels for 6 cattle to walk in. Two teams, 3 pairs of cattle each. Rabbi Huda Omer shalaba kshuros v'lo mutaros. So Rabbi Huda says no, it can actually be 2 teams of 4 cattle each, and not only that, but they have to be tied, not loose. So we'll say again, what that means is kshuros means that they're a little tighter together, as opposed to if they're untied, that takes up more space. Achas nichnasas va'achas yotzes. One group going in, one group coming out. Again, we'll see in the Mishnah that what they're actually referring to is 10 amos. 10 amos. Why they have to phrase it this way, we'll see in the Gemara. So the Gemara says, "Mutar lahakriv lebe'er ubevachete pararosha v'ruba bifnim v'shosa." Now, we'll say, so now we've just established the maximum amount of space in between the panels is the amount for 2 teams of cattle, either made up of 2 cattle, 3 cattle each, or 4 cattle each, going in, tied together, one going in one direction, one going the other direction. What about in terms of if you want to make a very small enclosure? What's the smallest amount of area around the well that you can enclose? So the Gemara says, "Mutar lahakriv lebe'er." There has to be at least enough space inside of the enclosure for a cow to have its head and the majority of its body inside in order to drink. And I both say, what are we concerned about? Why is that the minimum shear? If you look at Rashi, last Rashi on the Daf, he says, "Ubilvad shetehei misfas habe'er ad bein hapasim kedei rosha v'ruba shel para aval b'tzir mehachilo dilma mamshich acher paraso umafik ledavlo chutz lemechitza v'kamafik mirshus hayachal shusam." So we'll say what we're concerned about is as follows. If the area of the enclosure is less than the amount of area necessary for the majority of a cow to be inside and to drink, we're concerned that you're going to end up drawing water and taking it outside of the enclosure in order to water your animals. The Gemara says, "Mutar laharchik," top of Yudches, "Mutar laharchik kol shehu ubilvad she'yir bebepasin." But you can make the enclosure as big as you want, as large as you want, but I will say provided that you add additional panels. In other words, remember, what we've just established is that halacha l'maisa, the maximum amount of space in between the L-shaped double panels is 10 amos. That's the maximum amount of space. So if you want to enlarge the space, you can do that, but what would you have to do? You'd have to add in intermediate panels. So you'd have to add in additional panels in between the double L-shaped panels in order to ensure that there's never more than 10 amos of space in between the panels. Rabbi Huda Omer ad beis sasain. Rabbi Huda says the maximum amount of space that you could enclose around the well is 2 beis sa'ah. Is 2 beis sa'ah. Amru lo amru beis sasaim el legina or the karfeif. So he said back to Rabbi Huda, that's not true. The maximum space of 2 beis sa'ah was only given regarding a gina, which is a garden, a karfeif. Now we'll see what this means. Look at Rashi, the gina, the karfeif, shena kifa ledira. So we'll say these are areas which are not enclosed for residential purposes. So karfeif, hekef gadol, chutz le'ir, lahachne sham eitzim la'otzar. So we'll say gina and karfeif are large areas which are not typically used for residential purposes. That's when you have a 2 sa'ah maximum. Aval, im hayedir o sahar o mukta o chaser. But if you have a deer, so Rashi says deer is ultimately, again, look at Rashi, aval im haya deer shal behemo sha'osin besados hayom kan v'hayom kan kedei lezabel begadlei behema. So say this was like a movable pen. They had a movable pen, or a sahar, Rashi says over here, is a pen that was used in a more permanent fashion for animals, or a chatzar, or muksa, excuse me, Rashi says, is an area, like a backyard, an area behind your home, which was used for certain activities of daily living, or a chatzar, which is a courtyard, as we know, afilu beis chameshes korin, afilu beis asara korin mutter. So we'll say, interestingly enough, what the Mishnah is getting into over here is the notion that the two base sa'ah maximum may be only limited to areas used for non-residential purposes. But for areas used for residential purposes, halacha l'maisa, you could enclose even a much larger area. Therefore, again, in more residential areas or areas used for residential purposes, you could enclose as much of an area as you want, as long as you keep on adding additional boards. So I will say, what we are introduced over here in this Mishnah is an incredible, incredible idea, which is the incredible leniency of Chazal in terms of enclosing a well. Because we need water now, again, I will say, we'll discuss when exactly Chazal made this takana and for whom they made this takana, because this is a major kula based on everything we've learned. The concept of diyumadin, the concept that you can enclose a well with a series of double posts. So all you need is 4 L-shaped posts at 4 corners. That encloses the well, allows you to draw water from the well, which is a Rishus HaYachid, into an area which was formerly a Rishus HaRabim. The only parameters of this is that the L-shaped posts themselves must be 10 tefachim high, must be 4 tefachim wide. By the way, when we say 4 tefachim wide, 4 tefachim in width refers to each section of the L, right? So each section of the L itself must be 10 tefachim high, 4 tefachim wide. There can only be a maximum of 10 amos in between each of the L-shaped posts. You could make the area as large as you want, at least according to what said Rabbi Yehuda, you can make the area as large as you want as long as you keep adding intermediate posts. In other words, there can never be more, so you have to make sure that there's never more than 10 tefachim. So if you want to enclose a larger area, you must include additional posts in between the L-shaped posts so as to minimize the amount of open space. Good. Says the Gemara. So also our Mishnah does not reflect the view of Chananya. Why not? The Sanya, Osin Pasan Labar, Vichavan L'Shayara. So also listen to this, because we learned in a Raisa, you can make pasin. I both say pasin are boards, which bepashtus is what our Mishnah is referring to over here. Now, right, our Mishnah uses lashon of pasin, of boards. We only call it diyumadin later on. So the Brisa says you can make pasin for a bar, vichavon l'shayara, but for a caravan you have to use ropes. And I both say this is what we spoke about in the last parak, right? About using ropes that are situated less than 3 tefachim from each other to create a lavud type of mechitz, right? Lavud says anything within 3 tefachim of each other is considered to be attached. So Allah had to make for a shayr. Chananya says, Chavanon lebar avalo pasin. So also listen to this. Now we're going to switch gears a little bit over here to a bar versus a be'er. So remember again, a be'er is a well. So a well, we assume, is something that constantly replenishes itself. It's from underground spring, as opposed to a bar. If you look at Rashi says bar, mayim mechunasim va'avidi depaski. So we'll say, what's a bar? A bar is a cistern. So essentially, a bar is a hole in the ground which collects rainwater. That's what happens. So again, there's no underground spring that's feeding that. It's just simply, again, water is falling into it from rain. So it collects there. Then we'll say, look at Rashi. Mai mechunasin, Rashi bar, mai mechunasin va'avidi depaski. So often, again, a bar could often go dry. And we'll say, how does a bar go dry? It doesn't rain. It doesn't rain. So I have no water in the bar. So Rashi says, Mishum hachi asar chananya tezimnin depaski maya ubatli mechitzas v'lo huchi pasi biraus ela mipnei meimeyen shal behemas oli regalim. Both say, listen to this. So interestingly enough, Chananya comes along and says that the leniency of what we call the diyumadin, the pasin, was only a din by be'er, not by bar. because boros often dry up, right? They're not a reliable water source. They're not a reliable water source. Ultimately, again, Chazal said if you want to draw water from a bar, you need regular mechitzas. Or at least chavalim, like these ropes. But the yumad in the pasan only work for a be'er. By the way, Rashi over here says something very important. Rashi over here highlights that why did Chazal institute this leniency? Because of behemoths oli regalim. We'll see this in greater depth in the coming days. But the notion that when people would be ola regal, people would come to Yerushalayim, Pesach, Shavuos, Sukkos, so they would often bring their animals with them. You needed a water source for animals. So there were public wells that were open, but the problem is if you were camping somewhere for Shabbos and you needed water for your animals, to have to erect regular mechitzas was an incredible hardship. So Chazal instituted this for those who are Oli Regel. Again, we'll see this in greater depth. So the Mishnah clearly doesn't reflect the view of Hananya, because Hananya holds that ultimately, again, pasin don't work for a bar. To which the Gemara says, no. Afilu tema Hananya, bar lechud, be'er lechud. No. Our Mishnah can reflect the view of Hananya. Why? Because Rabbi say Hananya is only talking about by a bar. He says by a bar, pasin don't work, but by a be'er, which is what the Mishnah is talking about, pasin, these double boards, do work. Others see like this. From the fact that Hananya didn't say that you have to use ropes for a bar and pasin for a be'er, Michlal de Chananya loshna bar veloshna be'er. Chavalin in, pasin lo. So we'll say, others say no. From a simple reading of Hananya does not distinguish between a bar and a be'er, and therefore it could very well be that Hananya holds that just like a bar needs chavalim, ropes to create a lavud mechitza, so too a be'er requires ropes to create a lavud mechitza, and pasin boards or diyumadin do not work. To which the Gemara says, Leimas is lo Hananya. Our Mishnah then would clearly not reflect the view of Hananya. To which the Gemara says, Afilu tema Hananya, lemaida kamar tanakama, kama hadele. We'll say it's possible not. When Hananya is commenting in the Braisa, Hananya only comments on the bar, ultimately, again, because that was what the Tanakama was talking about. But we don't see from the Braisa what Hananya's position would be, lagabe be'er. Okay? Lema maslisin del Rabbi Akiva. Our Mishnah does not reflect the view of Rabbi Akiva. How so? This nan, echad be'er harabim, or bar harabim, or be'er hayachid, osin lahen pasin, ava bar hayachid, osin lo mechitza, gavo asar tvachim div Rabbi Akiva. So both say, because remember, Rabbi Akiva is on record as saying as follows: whether you have a be'er that belongs to the public, or a bar that belongs to the public, or a be'er that belongs to an individual, for all of those cases, you could use pasin. You could use the boards. However, a bar, which is just the cistern, just the hole to collect rainwater, that belongs to an individual, that requires a regular mechitza. These are Rabbi Akiva. V'yilohachi katani lebiros, but yet our Mishnah only speaks about the ability to use boards for a be'er. You can only use pasin or diyumadin, right? The L-shaped enclosure. You can only use it for a be'er. Lebe'eros in leboros lo. I feel Tim Rabbi Akiva. No, our Mishnah could even reflect the view of Rabbi Akiva. How so? The Gemara says, Be'er ma'im chayim de psikale loshna derabim veloshna diyachid katani. So I'll say, when it comes to a be'er, right, which has which has a spring, a be'er ma'im chayim, where the halacha is decisive, that's ultimately again where we make no distinction between a be'er owned by the public or a be'er owned by the individual. Everyone agrees in those circumstances that halacha l'maisa, you could use the pasin, you could use the boards to enclose it. Bar mechunasin delo psika. When it comes to halachos of a bar, which I will say does not stem from a spring, but rather is just collected water, delo psikale, where the halacha is not agreed upon, lo katani, ultimately again is not included in the Mishnah. So we'll say our Mishnah doesn't reflect the view of Rabbi Yehuda ben Bava. How so? This not Rabbi Yehuda ben Bava Omer ein osin pasin el lebe'er harabim bilvad. Because what Rabbi Yehuda ben Bava said, you could only use the boards to enclose a be'er that belongs to the public. V'iluhacha katani lebiros loshna derabim veloshna diachi. Yeah, Rabbi say if you look in our Mishnah does not seem to make a distinction between a be'er owned by the public or a be'er owned by an individual. The Mishnah seems to indicate that any be'er can be enclosed by the pasin. To which the Gemara says, "I feel Tamer Rabbi Yehuda ben Bava, my biraos da alma." Well, so you could say the Mishnah doesn't follow the view of Rabbi Yehuda ben Bava. What does Rabbi Yehuda ben Bava say? What is biraos? What are wells? General wells. So general wells, and I will say general wells. We assume in this context means what? Public wells. Public wells. I will say, meaning a pashut reading of the Mishnah is that the wells that we are talking about are not individually owned wells in someone's reshus hayachid, but rather, again, general wells which were public wells. Fine, so we'll say, so bottom line, we tried to highlight already that the Mishnah does not reflect the view of these three different opinions, but in fact, that's not the case. In fact, again, it may reflect all of these views. My diyumadin, what is the word diyumadin? Rabbi Yirmiyah ben Elazar, diyo amudin, two pillars, because I will say the diyumadin are the L-shaped boards, two pillars, a contraction. Good. So the Gemara goes weiter. We'll say here some incredibly beautiful Gemara. Tanan Hasam, Rabbi Yehuda Omer. So we'll say, so I just want to point out from this so far, nothing's changed in our understanding of the Mishnah. Right? The concept that we outlined in the Mishnah still is solid. It could be these views. Do agree with the Mishnah, don't agree with the Mishnah, fine. Tanan Hasam, Rabbi Yehuda Omer, Kol hashisim p'turin, chutz min hadiyufra. So we'll say, interesting enough, switching gears a little bit over here. Rashi says, shisin mine te'enim ra'os kidar meseches brachas p'turim min admai. The chayf teros in lochas alei amar zeshram. But listen to this interesting halacha. The concept of demai. The concept of demai means that it was a takana of Chazal, that if you buy produce from an Amoretz, you must go ahead and tithe it. Why? Because we're not sure if Amei Haaretz took proper tithes or not. And interestingly enough, the Gemara seems to indicate over here, we'll say, what's the concern? Why wouldn't an Am Haaretz go ahead and tithe his produce? So one possibility is he doesn't know the halachas. Okay. Interesting enough, the Gemara doesn't seem to feel that's the issue. The issue the Gemara seems to feel as I play over here is that the Am Haaretz doesn't want to lose money. Remember again, tithing costs you produce. The Am Haaretz doesn't want to lose money. So because he doesn't want to lose money, therefore Allah say he doesn't go ahead and tithe. So the Gemara says something very interesting. Shisin p'turin. Shisin about say are inferior figs. So because they are inferior figs, we assume the Am Haaretz does tithe them. Why? Because since they're inferior, he doesn't feel like he's losing anything by tithing them. Chutz min hadiyufra, with the exception of diyufra, because apparently diyufra was a better type of fig, so that the Am Haaretz would be a bit more reluctant to tithe. So the Gemara says, "My diyufra, what's diyufra? Amar Ula, Ilan ha'osed diyo peros bashana." So Ula said this is the type of fig where the tree produces 2 crops a year. So diyo means the two. Supposed to say the reason this is being brought down is because diyumadin means 2, right? Two boards, 2 planks. So we're using other examples of other things that have this diyo identity. So diyufra is a type of fig where the tree produces figs twice a year. I'm Rabbi Yirmiyah ben Elazar. So also listen to this. Now the Gemara is going to get into some beautiful agarata. Some beautiful agarata. So I'm Rabbi Yirmiyah ben Elazar. Diyo pirtzuf panim. Hayulala Adam Rishon. Adam Rishon will say was created with literally 2 faces. 2 faces. The Adam Rishon was created, well, we'll see. Shnei Amar, Achar v'kedem sartani. So the Gemara quotes the pasuk. Quotes the pasuk from Tehillim that literally, again, from the front and from the back, you have created me. Ksiv vayiven Hashem. So we'll say Ksiv vayiven Hashem satzela. So we'll say, so before you go on, the Gemara is painting an image over here that the first human being, Adam HaRishon, was created with two parts to him. The front, or one part was man, and the back was, or the other part, the other side was woman, and then HaKadosh Baruch Hu split the two into 2 beings. Ksiv, but yet the pasuk says Vayivan Hashem satzela. But yet the pasuk also says that Hashem built up the rib, which sounds like again Chava, woman, comes from the rib of man. Rav Shmuel Chad Amar Pirtzuf v'Chad Amar Zanav. So one says Machlokes Rav and Shmuel. One says that ultimately again woman was already built into man. Pirtzuf, I would say, means that there was an image. So the first human being, the first person, was a two-sided being. On one side, it looked like man. On the other side, it looked like woman. But they were all one entity. Then HaKadosh Baruch Hu went ahead and subsequently split them off from each other. The other opinion says Zanav, that Adam was born with a tail. And I will say, tail doesn't literally mean tail. Tail just means perhaps some type of additional appendage that was then removed from Adam and built up into woman, built up into Chava. So Bishlam Alamandam appears of Hainu Dichsiv Achar Vekedem Sartani. So according to the opinion that says that there was literally an additional, I'll call it facade, right? That there was an additional, that woman was an actual side of the first human being. That makes sense because David HaMelech says, you have formed me on the front and on the back. Elamandam Zanav, but according to the opinion that says that it was a tail, my achar v'kedem sartani. What's the meaning of that phrase? You have formed me from the front and the back. Kid Rab Ami, Dam Rabbi Ami, achar l'maaseh bereshis v'kedem laparanos. It means man was the last part of creation, yet the first to be punished. So the Gemara says, Bishlam ha'achar l'maaseh bereshis delo ivriad malishapsa. So I understand that man was the last thing to be formed because he wasn't created until Erev Shabbos. Ella v'kedam laparanos mahi. But what does it mean that he was the first, ultimately again to be punished? Right? What does that mean? He was the first to be punished. So the Gemara says, Ilema mishum klala. If you say ultimately again, it's because of curse, meaning he was the first entity, the first being to be cursed in the aftermath of the chait, of the eating from the eitz das tovara. That's not true. He betril, so the Gemara says, he betril niskalal nachash. I'm sorry. Ha betrila niskalal nachash, ulebasof niskalal lechava, ulebasof niskalal adam. It's not true. When it came to punishment, first the snake was cursed, then Chava was cursed, and in fact Adam is only cursed all the way at the end. Elul mabul. Rather, when it says he was the first to be punished, it meant for the mabul. D'chsiv vayimach Hashem vayimach kol yakum asher al pnei adama me adam va'ad behema. That by the mabul Hashem erased everything that was on the earth from man until animal. So man was the first thing to be punished by the mabul. So bishlam laman da'amar hainu d'chsiv vayetzer treyudin. So we'll say, according to the opinion who says that the first human being was really able to say, if you could imagine, it's hard to imagine, but if you could imagine that it was two beings essentially fused into one. One side man, one side woman, and then HaKadosh Baruch Hu ultimately again splits them off to be two independent beings. So according to the opinion who says that's how the first human being looked, it makes sense. That's why it says the word Vayitzer, that Hashem fashioned Adam with two yuds. The two yuds really representing two different aspects of creation. Now within that first human being, there are beis tzuros, Rashi says. There are two beings in one. Elamandamar zon of my Vayitzer. So this is incredible. A whole shas is worth it for this next line. But according to the opinion who says that it was just an additional appendage that Adam was created with, and that appendage was then removed and built up into Chava. Why two yuds? Kid Reb Shimon ben Pazi. Reb Shimon ben Pazi. Oili mi yitzri, oili mi yotzri. Shimon ben Pazi says, Rabbi say, if there's one mantra that captures the entirety of the struggle of life, oili mi yitzri, woe to me because of my yetzer, because of my inclinations, because of my wants, my desires, my proclivities. Oili mi yotzri, and woe to me because of my Creator. I will say we are locked in a constant struggle between the Yetzer and the Yotzer, between the inclination and the Creator. My Creator wants me to do one thing, and my Yetzer wants me to do another thing. And if I make my Yotzer, if I make my Creator happy, then my Yetzer is angry at me. And if I make my Yetzer happy, then my Yotzer is unhappy with me. I will say life is marked by this constant struggle between the Yetzer and the Yotzer. Look at Rashi. My Yetzer makes me miserable if I try to fulfill the will of my Creator. And woe to me from my Creator if I fall prey or if I fulfill the will of my Yetzer. I will say, isn't this incredible? Doesn't this sum up the entirety of the human condition? Oili miyitzri, oili miyotzi. The double yuds are embedded in the very creation of Adam Harishon. Because from the moment that we are born is the moment the struggle begins. And it only ends when we take our last breath and we leave this world. The struggle between the Yetzer and the Yotzer is the struggle of life. B'shalom andamar pirtzuf, hainu dichsev zachar in the cave of Baram. There was, according to the opinion that says that it was a pirtzuf, that literally, again, there was a full image of woman and man in one body. This is what it means when it says zachar in the cave of Baram, that Hashem created us, zachar and nekeva, male and female. L'mandamar zon of my zachar in the cave of Baram. But according to the opinion, it says there was an appendage that was then removed and built up into Chava. So what does it mean? He created them male and female. It says on one hand that HaKadosh Baruch Hu created them male and female. Also. So let's listen to this. Betchila also machshava lebaros shnayim ulebasof lo nivra ela achos. We'll see what it means to say is as follows. In the beginning, Hashem thought that, you know what, I will create two human beings simultaneously. I'll first create man, and I'll create man and woman together, right? Two separate beings simultaneously. But then Hashem decided to ultimately create them as one being. Whether that one being had two facades, two sides, or that one being had an extra appendage, both say the idea, of course, on a hashkafic level that HaKadosh Baruch Hu wanted to create for us is an incredible yesod and paradigm in marriage. This notion that husband and wife view themselves as one entity. The fact that Adam and Chava came from one body, it tells us that the yesod ultimately in the union between a man and woman is not two people coexisting, but rather it's two people, v'hayu lebasar echad. It's two people. Let's say, if you think about it, that's right. That's how the Torah frames marriage. Al ken yazov ish es av v'imo, right? V'davak beishto v'hayu lebasar echad. They will become one entity. Why do husband and wife have to become one entity, right? I have to get along as long as we coexist. No, because you always say, what is all of marriage? All of marriage is striving to get back to that point of Adam and Chava before they were split. That's the essence of marriage. Getting back to what that original human being was. Kadosh Baruch Hu was creating a paradigm. The way everything was created was a paradigm. Adam and Chava, husband and wife, as one entity, as one guf, v'hayula basar echad, mamish is Adam, is husband and wife, getting back to what marriage was supposed to be. It's an incredible. So according to the opinion, it says that it was a pirtzuf, another facade. That's why it says that after Kadosh Baruch Hu created Chava, that he sealed off Adam's flesh. But if it was just an appendage, what does it mean when it says that he closed off the flesh underneath it? It means the area of the incision. If HaKadosh Baruch Hu took a rib, it means after he took the rib, he sealed off the wound. Okay, according to the opinion, it says that it was an appendage. That's why the pasuk says Vayiven, that Hashem built Chava. That lashon makes sense if it was a rib. He took a rib and he built the rest of Chava from that rib. So the Gemara says, my Vayiven. But according to the opinion, it says that it was a pirtzuf. It was a facade. What does it mean that he built it? The Chidur of Shimon Menasya. Listen to how beautiful this is. The Darash of Shimon Menasya, Vayiven Hashem Elokim Asatzala. Hashem built the rib. So listen to how beautiful this is. Melamed Shekila Kadosh Baruch Hu Lechava. The Rebbeinu Shalom, before HaKadosh Baruch Hu brought Chava to Adam, what did he do? He braided her hair. Ve'avia la'Adam Harishon. And then he brought her to Adam Harishon. Shekim bekrache hayom korin lekilasa b'niyasa. Because in the distant lands, they call braiding building. So when it says that Hashem built her, it means he braided her. He wanted Chava to look beautiful when she first met Adam. So the Rebbeinu Shalom braided her. We'll say, do you understand the imagery in that? What does it mean? HaKadosh Baruch Hu braided her hair. Let's say, who normally braids the hair of a little girl? So the mother, maybe the father sometimes also. But the idea is how much love Hashem has for us. That sometimes we look at HaKadosh Baruch Hu as, Avinu Shabashamayim, the Melech Malchei Hamlochim, this great king who lives in the celestial sphere. Meanwhile, what did HaKadosh Baruch Hu do for the first woman? He braided her hair. Just like a loving father. The Rebbeinu Shalom loves us so much and cares for us and just wants to be with us and literally just wants to take care of us just like a parent wants to take care of a child. Such an incredible imagery. Davar acher vayiven Hashem Elokim amrav chista v'amrei mastisa tanam alamed shebnach l'shparuchu lechav lekibinyan. Both say other understand this to be in a more physiological sense that HaKadosh Baruch Hu built Chava like a storehouse. What does this mean? Lechava kibinyan otzer amud beis ma otzer zeh rachav milamata v'kartzer milamala. Just like a storehouse is wider at the bottom and thinner at the top. Why? Because both say a storehouse needs to store produce. So therefore the bottom is wider than the top. Af ha'isha rechava milamato k'tzara milamalo kedei lekabel savlad. So to the way HaKadosh Baruch Hu built woman, the way He structured woman, is that she is wider on the bottom and thinner at the top, so as to be able to conceive and to carry life. Incredible. So the Gemara says, "Vayiveh el ha'adam." This is how beautiful this is. HaKadosh Baruch Hu brought Chava to Adam. Melamed shas HaKadosh Baruch Hu shashvinas la'adam harishon. It shows that HaKadosh Baruch Hu made all of the wedding arrangements for Adam. He was supposed to kiviyachol to the Ribono Shel Olam was Adam Harishon's best man. He was Adam Harishon's best man. He brought Chava to the Chasana, right? He took care of all of the arrangements. Mikan legado shiyases shashvinas lekatan va'al yira lo. We both say from here we see that the great suchos in taking care of the wedding arrangements, even for someone who was of a lower station than you. Kadosh Baruch Hu took care of all of the chasana arrangements for Adam Harishon. So from here you see if you have the ability to help someone out with their chasana, to help them get married, to help them have a beautiful celebration, even if they're quote unquote lower than you, it should not be something light in your eyes. But according to the opinion, let's listen to this Gemara. According to the opinion who says that no Adam and Chava were two beings fused into one. One side Adam, one side Chava. Listen to this. Hey Mino Sagi Beresha. Who walked in front? Who walked in front? An important shaila, right? Who was the front? Who was the back? Amrav Nachar Bar Yitzchak Mistabra De Zachar Sagi Beresha. It must be that the male side walked in front. Why? Nobody say why. This Sanya Lo Yehalich Adam Achore Isha Baderach. A man should not walk behind a woman on the road, vafilu hi ishto, even behind his own wife. Now what's the pshat over here? Look at Rashi. Rashi says, vafilu ishto shehu ginayla. Listen to this. The concern of walking behind a woman is a concern of hirur avera, of impure thoughts. If a man walks behind a woman, he may gaze at her. And again, now Rashi points out over, interestingly enough, that these concepts apply to a married woman. Because a married woman, of course, is an Isra Erva. So it's interesting that he applies it to a married woman. Others actually understand this to be even in the context of a single woman. The idea is that a man should not do things that are going to bring him to an impure thought. Impure thoughts. So therefore, the Gemara says, even one's own wife. First of all, not everybody knows who your wife is. That's number one. And number two, a person should just accustom himself to conduct himself in a moral fashion. So we'll say, isn't this incredible? So Rav Nachman Bar Yitzchak says it must have been that the male side walked first, because for the female side to walk first, that would be kiviyachol, the male side would be walking behind her, and therefore again a man walking behind a woman by definition is a fundamental breach of tznius, a fundamental breach of morality. So the Gemara says, Nizdamna lo ala gesher. What happens if a man is walking behind a woman on a bridge? Yisal kenel itztadin. Ultimately, he should try to pass her. The idea being both say, so again, Chazal understood that one of the strongest drives we have is the drive for immorality. It's one of the strong, you see, it's maisim b'chol yom, that great people make terrible, terrible mistakes because of this desire, because of this taiva. So it might sound a little bit dramatic for us. You can't walk behind a woman, even your own wife. Chazal knew what they were talking about. And a lot of times when we think that we are not subject to the temptations that Chazal said we're subject to, is exactly those times that we get ourselves in an incredible amount of unnecessary trouble. So Chazal said, don't walk behind a woman. Walk behind a woman. It's not misogynistic. It's not because Chazal didn't like women. It's because Chazal understood how men work. And at the end of the day, something as seemingly innocuous as walking behind someone could spark hirhurim, could spark lustful thoughts that could end up in a really bad place. Anyone who walks behind a woman in a river, so I'll say, what's happening in a river? Rashi says, because in a river, if a woman was crossing a river, she would often lift up her clothing. in order that her clothing shouldn't get wet. So ultimately, again, if he's walking behind a woman crossing the river, he'll see her raise her clothing. Ein lo chelik v'olam haba. A person like this has no portion in the world to come. Now, both say that's a very dramatic statement. What does that mean? He has no. She has. And so again, I will say, obviously, it's not literally saying that if you walk behind the woman it means that if this is the lifestyle you accustom yourself to, that you're not careful what you look at, and you're not careful with shmiras ha'inayim, and you're not careful where you are, that'll lead you to do things which will deprive you of a portion in the world to come. Meaning the act of walking behind the woman as she crosses the river is certainly not good. Does that one act deprive you of olam haba? No. What I will say, what Chazal are saying is like this. Bad things, right? Sinful acts don't just appear from nowhere. They're often the culmination and the result of a series of smaller acts, smaller indiscretions that usually lead me to something much bigger. So if I'm not careful what I look at, if I'm not careful with who I walk behind, at some point in time, unfortunately, that'll lead me down the road to the commission of a serious avera, which could deprive me of my olam haba. The Gemara goes right there. We'll say, along this same theme, Tan Rabbanan, Hameratze ma'os leisha miyado liyado, or miyada liyado, b'shil sheyistakel ba. Let's listen to this. If a person literally counts money, meaning a person engages in a financial transaction with a woman just in order to gaze upon her. So we'll say, so again, he's doing business, but again, he's doing something just with the intention because he wants to look at her. Now he's not doing anything else with her. He has the intention to gaze at her lustfully. Afilu dome leMoshe Rabbeinu shekiba Torah mehar Sinai lo yinoke medina shel Gehenna. We'll say, do you hear this, Gemara? So if a man goes in and goes out of his way to intentionally look at a woman, even if he, and again, obviously in a lustful fashion, even if he is as great as Moshe Rabbeinu, who received Torah from Har Sinai, he will not be saved from Gehenna. What does he will not be saved from Gehenna? Same idea. Does it mean that this is sending you to Gehenna? No. What Chazal are teaching us is, Rabbi say, is the little things we do. We'll say, what's wrong with gazing at a woman lustfully? Okay, so maybe it's for those sasuru acharei einechem. So again, it could be it's a lav daraisa. Is it a rayis? Is it? So we'll say, so no, one can. I'm just looking. But Chazal understood with things, a lifestyle that starts with I'm just looking, usually ends up with something more severe. Life is all about creating a proper lifestyle that is conducive to Kedusha, because so many times in life what we just try to figure out is, okay, it's simple. Is it mutter or is it aser? If it's not aser, then I'm going to do it. If it's right, so it doesn't work that way. It doesn't work that way. A person has to structure a lifestyle of Kedusha, because if my lifestyle is not filled with Kedusha, I'm going to end up in Gehenna. It's just the way that it is. That's not because God is angry. It's because if I don't structure the right kind of lifestyle, I'm going to end up in all the wrong places. Manoach, the father of Shimshon, was in Ama Oretz. Shneimar, Vayakam vayelech Manoach acharei ishto. Manoach, the pasuk says that Manoach walked behind his wife. So the fact that Manoach walked behind his wife indicates thus that he was in Ama Oretz. Maskal Nachamar Yitzchak Al Me'ato. Gabi Elkino dichsev vayelech Elkino acharei ishto. But it says that Elkanah, the father of Shmuel, walked behind his wife Chana. He's also Am Haaretz. V'hachinami Gabi Elisha dichsiv vayakam v'eleach achareh. Yet the pasuk by Elisha also says that Elisha walked behind the Isha Shunamis. They're also going to say Hachinami Ela acharei devar veitzasa. Now they're both saying in those contexts what it means is that Elisha followed after the counsel of the Isha Shunamis, or that Elkanah followed the counsel of his wife Chana. So the Gemara says, Hachanami, achar dvareh ve'itzasa. So too by Manoach, it need not mean that he actually walked behind her. Rather, it means that he followed her counsel. And according to the opinion, it says that Manoach was really Am Haaretz. He obviously didn't even pay attention in yeshiva when they taught them psukim dichsiv, v'atakim rivka v'anarosel, v'aterkavna acharei hagmolim, v'atelachna acharei ha'ish, in Parshas Chayisara, when Rivka is coming back to Yitzchak, what does the pasuk say? Rivka and her maidens got up, they went on the camels, and they followed the Ish being Eliezer. They walked behind the Ish, and the ish did not walk behind them. But we'll finish with this. Amr Rabbi Yochanan, acharei ari v'lo acharei isha. But listen to how incredible this Gemara is. Better to walk behind the lion and not walk behind a woman. Which also means better to place yourself in physical danger than to place yourself in spiritual danger. Yet interesting, I should say, better to place yourself in physical danger than to place yourself in moral danger. But yet, better to place yourself in moral danger than to place yourself in spiritual danger. Listen to this Gemara. But yet it is better. So we'll say, what are we concerned about? That if you walk behind the idol, you're going to be pulled into idolatry. But better to walk behind an idol than to walk behind the shul at the time that they're davening. Because I will say, to walk behind the shul at the time that they're davening and not to walk in looks like you're actively repudiating avodas Hashem. So better to go ahead and walk behind the idol and run the risk of being pulled into idolatry than to chas v'shalom walk behind the shul at the time that they're davening and not joining it. So we'll have to stop over here. There's a lot beautiful. I got it to tomorrow as well. So let me show me. I think tomorrow morning we're going to start at 5:45. We'll start, so we'll get a little bit of an earlier head start on the daf. I'll put it down to the WhatsApp. Let's see, Yeshikayach.